only in the later stages of my ashram yogi practice on the spiritual path, on the self-realization path, I started to realize that it is not enough to just do the yogic practice, the meditation, the pranayama, and all the purifying techniques and everything that we did, that I did as an ashram yogi, all the teachings that I received. I realized it was not enough to just do those. How I realized that? It was because I was still suffering. I was still devastated by emotional suffering, by the triggers that would sometimes be triggered, and I would not know how to handle them. So after I realized that there has to be a way to deal with those as well. And only later on I realized that all of those trauma traces in the body that react as triggers, that are being brought up by situations in our lives that hurt, those trauma traces, those contractions are deeply rooted in the body, not just in the mind. So they're not just limiting beliefs, like, for example, I'm not enough or I'm not worthy. They're also lodged, their deepest root is lodged in the body. And so throughout my journey of emotional healing, when I took it on, let's say, as a separate or as an included part of my self-realization process, I went through so many modalities for emotional healing. And I remember in the beginning, I would go through like about 12 steps, 12 stages for one single trigger to realize what was the limiting belief, what was the pain, the emotional suffering that I would experience, what was the cause in childhood. I had to go through forgiveness, forgiving the others, forgiving myself, understanding how that limiting belief was shaping the way I was thinking and behaving. So it was a long process that I alone learned how to find my way through. And it was difficult, it was heavy, and it was complicated, really. And that process has refined in my understanding as I went through this emotional process. Every time an emotional suffering would come up, would be triggered, I would attempt to go through the emotional suffering, to go through the process of healing, to uproot that, to heal that root. And it took me a long time to master this process, to be very confident that I can do that with no matter what emotion arises. And in the beginning, I was excruciatingly devastated every time such an emotional suffering would arise, because at that time, I thought it meant that I am not good enough at my spiritual realization process. I'm not good enough at my emotional healing process. But I know better now that means exactly the opposite. When these emotional triggers are coming up, when that suffering resurfaces, that is an indication that you've just opened up more, you've created more space so that these fragments, these parts of ourselves that we've been hiding away from, or they have been hiding away from being seen, out of fear, out of shame, out of guilt, out of anger, whatever such emotion or belief that separate part or fragment of yourself holds, we've been looking away. Our automatic reaction would be to make them go away because they hurt, and because subconsciously we feel that means something bad about ourselves. But now later on, I realized that the way to deal with this, and that is what actually simplified the emotional healing process to its most utmost simplicity and purity. It's just such a beautiful, direct process that now I know and is completely distilled to the irreducible way, the ultimate way for emotional healing is just by being the presence of awareness and accept fully these parts of yourself that still feel separate, isolated, and are still hiding. So the fact that they come up, it feels like almost like an honor, because now you have the opportunity to be deeply intimate, deeply loving of these parts of you that were banished so far, that you wanted them to go away, to reject them, to solve them, but by annihilating them. The actual ultimate healing is acceptance and complete lovingness, warmth, welcoming feeling towards these parts of us that still keep that sense of separation. These are fragments that our sense as a separate self are lodged into the body. They're still survive the realization, the awakening. And if we want to contribute to our self-realization process, we go about healing them just by simply being the presence of awareness within which these emotions appear, completely letting go of the story, because that is what actually creates the suffering. Completely letting go of the mental process about that suffering and just simply going to the sheer experience, what it feels like in the body, that sensation, and receiving it with love, touching it with love, lightly, really gently, so that they don't scare away. Just simply being a pool of love, if you will, within which they can now be fully what they are. So if we're talking about a fear, you just simply be with that fear fully, without judging it, without giving it labels, just simply feeling it, feeling the texture of it, allowing it to fully be what it is, receiving it with love. And just by doing that, it will just dissolve. It will dissolve, it will lose its contraction, its separateness. And you will realize that at the heart of all of those hurtful emotions is the happiness, the peace of yourself. There is no separation, there never has been. The only reason why that contraction was there was a belief. So that is how we go about our emotional healing process. That is how we gradually release these layers of contractions from our body. And that is how we gradually release the sense of being a separate self that is lodged in these contractions in the body. And that is how we give back the luminous, the sense of luminosity, lightness, transparency to the body, to realize that our body is actually luminous, transparent, light, consciousness. That is how we regain our sense of infinite luminous consciousness in the body as well. So we relieve the body of contractions and we give back the lightness, the luminosity of its true nature. And by doing that, that sense of separation disappears, that sense that I am a separate entity that is isolated, so it needs to protect itself out of fear because it is vulnerable, or it is lacking something, so it has to fulfill itself through desires. All of those go away, and gradually you know yourself to be fully in your body, mind, infinite, transparent, luminous awareness. Later in life, I realized about myself that as I'm going about my life, I have always been driven to simplify everything, to essentialize everything, to streamline, to make more coherent everything that I was engaged in, any kind of process, any kind of activity. I've always wanted to make everything as simple as possible, as logical as possible, as coherent, smooth, streamlined, effective as possible. And hence, that was exactly what happened with the Academy of Being. I did that for the Academy of Being as well. That is why our curriculum is one of a kind, I would say, because it is deeply essentialized without bypassing anything, without skipping any essential and necessary part of the self-realization process. So you basically have everything in one place that is necessary and sufficient to get you the clarity that you need and the effectiveness that you need to go about your realization process in a way that is avoiding, that is eliminating unnecessary struggle, fumbling, and suffering. So you go straight to the point, you go straight to the core, so that you can go about your process with the confidence, with the certainty, and the peace of mind that you know what you're doing and everything is perfect as it is. I hope you feel called to this, to be part of the Academy of Being, the academic year. So it's a 1 year, 3 trimester deep dive. It is practice focused, but of course we also cover all the necessary teaching and the core challenges that occur on the self-realization path. So if this is something that speaks to you and you would like to have for yourself, then I invite you to join us for the Academy of Being. We begin the academic year in February 2025. Registration is now open. You can go to the link below this video to find out more details about our offering.